Hi, this is Brian from The Sleeping Elephant. I'm going to review Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. This book is the sequel to The Obstacle is the Way. Here's a short bio on Ryan. At 19 years old, he dropped out of school and worked under Tucker Max and Robert Greene as an intern. At 21, he became a marketing director for American Apparel, which is now in bankruptcy. At 25 years old, he wrote his first book, Trust Me, I'm Lying, Confessions of a Media Manipulator, which I consider his best book. That book is about how there's a media agenda being proposed and how the business of media is run. Ryan is an expert in stoicism and marketing. He found success at 19 years old when he was picked up by Tucker Max, which is essentially the straw man of the manosphere, not the most liked guy. And Robert Greene, one of the best research authors out there with 48 Laws of Power and the 33 Strategies of War. And at 19 years old, having that success, it does something to your ego. He puts it off as in sections in 3 sections: aspire, success, and failure. These are the areas where the ego is the enemy. And by watching some of his other reviews online, since Ryan Holiday is a copywriter, he has to make it a title that will appeal to the masses and for many generations. So the book is not going to be about humility, which sounds boring. It has to be somewhat clickbaity or contradicting. So ego is the enemy. He had this tattooed on his arm as well as the obstacle is the way. So he really believes in this book. Sounds a bit self-absorbed or sentimental. And as a big fan of stoicism, in which you are able to handle whatever situation comes your way. Ryan may even be brainwashed by stoicism. He writes in a philosophical way, very analytical, and a citing research tone. This does have very good content and many stories that I've never heard of with examples from Jackie Robinson, Bass Rutten the Fighter, Malcolm X, Fight Club the book, Seneca, Kanye West, and Stephen Pressfield. So it is a very eclectic group of individuals that he cites, as well as this book called Acid Dusk, which I've bought but I have not read yet. Since Ryan is a apprentice of Robert Greene, he has this very historical style where they look back in the books. Books can be lies. I don't think you should believe everything you read. There is the art of the story, and there are many citations from history. Of course, some of these can be lies, but there are citations that Robert Greene and Ryan Holiday are deeply woven into this heavy reading culture, into looking back at history and to pull out the nuggets and little pieces of wisdom from the past. There are some from great rulers and sports people: Alex the Great, Xerxes, William Tecumseh Sherman, Howard Hughes, and John Wooden the coach, as well as Christopher McCandless from Into the Wild. And you could even go back in the future for DeLorean and how that car failed. Here's a quote from one of my favorite authors that is on the cover of Ego is the Enemy, and it's by Stephen Pressfield, who is the Colonel Sanders of our generation. He didn't really get success till he was in his 50s. Ryan Holiday is one of his generation's finest thinkers, and this book is his best yet. Now that you hear this quote, this is a social proof tactic. Ryan Holiday is a marketer, so he's putting one of the top authors, complimenting him on his thinking ability. One highlight that I want you to pay attention to is Ryan Holiday is dropping wisdom when he's only 29 years old. And for someone to have success at 19, I don't think he's had that type of toughness to him. I'm not trying to pick on him if he's weak or a wimp. And he has 2 mentors next to him, which is one of the unique things about someone. You have good and bad people in your life. And he has Tucker Max, which is, I wouldn't say a man of virtue. And he is the straw man of the manosphere. Not many people get along with him. Roosh, Mike Cernovich, me, and many other authors in the manosphere or the red pill domain. Then you have Robert Greene, one of the biggest talents to come out of understanding strategy and power. And that is real cool to be recognized like that. He made a good decision, I believe, by dropping out of school at 19 and taking that risk. School is not as important nowadays. You have YouTube, you could read for virtually nothing, and you can get mentors, which he did. So he made a very good decision by taking the risk. But in this process of leaving school, he got a ton of recognition. It kind of fluffed his ego. He exudes this in this book, and he is a practitioner of humility. There are a few things that I truly disagree in this book. I'm going to mention it later, and that's one of the reasons why I'm giving it a low rating. It's got a ton of good content. It's worth reading, but there are a few things I want you to pay attention to where I truly disagree with him. There is this chapter called Do Not Be Passionate that I will be going over, as well as some of the figures in his book that I just don't agree with. What is this book about? If the ego is the enemy, what is the ego? And he doesn't want you to put ego as in the Freudian sense, where you have the superego, the ego, and the id. He puts it in the context of someone who's arrogant, someone who's not humble, someone who's extremely self-absorbed into their selfish delusion and wrapped up into entitled wishful thinking and like a bizarre rocket ship, top of the mountain king. The objective Ryan somewhat shoots for is being confidently humble is the desired goal. There's ego versus confidence and ego versus humility. To be outside yourself and to be compassionate about the world around you. And to listen to aged wisdom. We all want our ego validated, whether it be confirmed by ourselves or by others. Think about the word rationality and how we rationalize the truth, whether it be shortened or a long form of it, or extremely wise. Rationalizing may be the enemy. Ryan uses a pretty good example from his own life where he worked with American Apparel and where the guy's name is Dov Charney. And he is the founder of American Apparel. And he fought mercilessly to maintain the company, where the board of directors tried to fire him. He had lawsuits of sexual harassment and financial issues. He wasn't going to go down not swinging to keep that business alive. I'm not sure about American Apparel, but I think they were one of those companies where they do the manufacturing of the clothes in America versus having them manufactured out in China or Vietnam where the labor is cheap. And this is something he saw right in front of him, where it was just a meltdown of ego. And he ended up losing almost all his money. And this is hard to see. I don't think he was a friend of Ryan. But he saw the drama play out. And this is something that you see with the companies, is you see a fight for the top or who is the leader. Or even to having a demoted status, where you're either fired or hired. If you're not hired, you're hurt because you were not successful. And if you're fired, that type of failure, some people can't handle, especially if they've never experienced it. They take it personal. Well, failure is a good thing. It can make you stronger, or you might even not be good for it. Or you might not even be fit for this type of career or job. Doors open and doors close. Another topic I wanted to mention briefly is he had 4 drafts rejected by a publishing company, where publishing companies don't really matter nowadays. I know he wants to sell his book. He wants to maintain that status where he has Robert Greene next to him, Tucker Max, his company. He has the status of American Apparel with him, as well as his company called Brass Check, where it's a marketing company. So he has all this success where these 4 books as well, that all you have to do nowadays is just hit publish and let it stand and let it be. Fear of failure might keep people away from your true calling. There is always room for self-improvement or getting better. You are not exactly perfect. There is ego versus vanity, and the vanity can strip away to the real layer of who you are, like an in-frame. There's a Streisand Effect where there's information being hidden, where it creates a psychological tension, where there's a mystery and there's a drive to get the information and spread it. For ego and success, what happens is that the legacy is going to try to be protected and the image will try to be forged and not tampered with. Rationalizing the status quo, no matter what truth strikes it. A thought that incited me when I read this book was, there's an ego of the corporation that was around the 1980s, 90s, or 2000s. But now, after the 2005 era, it's more about the era of politically correct, pushing triggers and entitlement. It's becoming an era of the ego with a politically correct attachment. And with an ego, you have to micromanage everybody around you, and acute self-awareness of your surroundings. And with that image or idea of the ego, it'll hold a monkey grip onto that spot or vision for eternity to retain that fantasy. And everybody will look around that with annoyance and with an urge to enlighten them. And sometimes the only thing you could do to enlighten them is tell them a story or challenge them indirectly. Or you could join the party and see the person plummet and short sell them all the way down, just like Barnes & Noble or Lehman Brothers, like a sucker. The ego is insatiable. It stands in the way. It's everywhere. It's short-term and doesn't have a long-term focus. It's tight and restricted. It seeks validation and will do anything to maintain status. Don't get into its way. Is the ego an enemy or an ally? Some remedies or counterintuitive points are silence, humility, action, awareness, void, Face the struggle head on. Not be impulsive. Relax. Don't talk too much. Listen. Things that keep the ego intact are not filling the void, self-promoting, seeking attention, seeking successfulness, having a Gatsby green view of success, protecting your legacy and image. Humility doesn't get respected. Loud gets the attention. Just like Canada, the metaphor, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Sheep and the fearful react to the ego. You want to take steps to get past the ego, to understand it or to be aware of its presence. You want to be alive and aware. You don't want to suffer the boredom of a beta male cog, living the Hegelian master-slave dynamic while picking your nose at philosophical facts because a wimpy Seneca said it. Go for it. Talk big. Be cocky and funny. Ryan makes it clear that there's a disruption that you need to take, that you don't want to look at things as a fantasy. But I don't necessarily agree with a fantasy. You could tell yourself a story, and a story can grip your mind and elevate your spirit. Tell stories. Stories are game. Stories challenge. Just because Sacramento, California is the capital doesn't mean it is a Disney fantasy city. Kings are ousted by the Dub Nation warriors. You can compare and compete all you want with other people around you, and there can be an incessant need to upgrade yourself. You're never satisfied. And once you get that little bit of success, whether it be, a few rounds or a series of events that crown with the trophy, and everybody around you determines that as a success, you may lose that hunger. You may play guard and seek security by closing down because you're the champ. You don't have that entrepreneurial fire no more. Like some of the young entrepreneurial startups, they have that high risk and nimble attitude. They take wild actions, a youthful energy and risk, and not abiding by the laws. Not like the slow big corporations that have to deal with all the red tape in the public. You're living in obscurity. A few examples that I've encountered in my life is being personal with the ego, whether it be with yourself or with others. Someone who knows himself, they can take the blunt truth. But many people are not aware they're zombies. And if you ever show someone and bluntly tell someone the truth, their ego can catch on fire, and they have a dissuading body language and denial or rational excuses. I like to do it, tell you the truth. Some of the funniest fucking things I've ever done were just really telling someone the truth. That's kind of when you know you have a friend, and hopefully they get stronger so they can handle the truth. And instead of massaging the ego, you not damage it, you just throw a jab at the ego. It hits insecurity, fear, and their objective truth, or what is the objective truth. That there's a reaction. They can project wild assertions at anything, at people, or rational excuses, like I said before. People think they know it all or are an expert for reading this book, but in the end, you have to be optimistic. Even if you are slightly insecure or you don't have enough experiences, you might have a fear of unknown. It's okay to fake it to make it, because at least you're trying. There's real no need to pay dues. That's a fallacy. That's someone who puts himself higher than you. Like you're not worthy, that you haven't paid your dues yet. It's a projection. Not paying dues is just a projection. The universe decides that. Having a big college degree or even a small degree is ego. It's not even valuable anymore. Here's some things I liked about the book. There was plenty of research done on people that I've never heard of, more on under-the-radar characters like John Boyd, Upton Sinclair. He's a writer for The Jungle, and it's a must-read book that you have to download and read. It's free on Amazon. And I didn't realize that Upton Sinclair ran an election, and the funny thing that he did is he wrote a book about himself succeeding before he even won the election. That just shows the ego of someone that, you have this vision that you have to go all in, yet do you really deserve? It depends on the people, not so much you. There are classic and top-notch metaphors, and high-quality research was done, and you probably had Robert Greene go over his work. Both The Obstacle and the Way and this book are very similar in terms of research. While highlight philosophy and stoicism, the overlap meshes well. There are precisely chosen quotes, plenty of citations, maybe too many citations instead of asserting his opinion. The book is pretty much a bibliography of books. Intuitively, you can tell that this book has taken a ton of time. You learn that entitlement creates ridiculous expectations. Most of my other reviews, I mentioned this constantly, is to never have entitlement. Unfortunately, the millennial generation gets stamped with this. He plugged in Tom Brady at the 199th pick. Someone else could have drafted him, but he was supposed to go to the 49ers, and the 49ers never picked him up. And with his crying, this propelled him to be a superstar. And Tom Brady was surprisingly at the game where Joe Montana threw the ball at Dwight Clark in the end zone, called the catch. Another line to ponder is, you can miss people by having high standards. Is that your ego's so high and inflated, you might price yourself out of the market, you price yourself too high, where you're not at a level that you can connect with people around you. He uses characters, quotes from relevant people, as well as from classic philosophers or historic characters. He cites Megadeth, Metallica, Fight Club, Kanye West. Of course, you got to mention him with his big ego. It was a good mix, an eclectic group of egos and people. Promotes or makes it available. There's that egomaniac in your life that you're just sick of, that just irritates the shit out of everybody, just waiting for them to fall so you can smile and get back to your life. He wants these egomaniacs to have humility, to put a mirror into your face and see who you are. There is a precipitous rise and the calamitous fall. Another quote that resonates with me is the Beanie Babies. This is like a 1990s phenomenon, just like the tulip bubble in the Netherlands. This is what Ty Warner said about the Beanie Babies. In quotes, I could put the Thai heart on manure and they'd buy it. Hence the phrase, you think your shit doesn't stink? Another angle that I'm glad he went into is in nature. He gives an example of John Muir, who is an explorer out here in California and someone who hiked and traveled in depths in the forest of the national parks out here. It is a very short section, but it brings up meditation and nature and how not so much as the world's bigger than you is that you're connected with it. He also brings up the story of Jackie Robinson, his battle with ego, and how he had to show self-restraint and had to be a class act during that time, the racist era, where he had to exercise humility, or he had to play his game and not play the racist game. That's an interesting story that I'm going to further explore with Jackie Robinson. It seems like a very interesting tale. There's humility in being an eternal student. And I think he has to relate with this because he's still only 29 years old. But at some point you have to go pro, just like Steven Pressfield. And last but not least, I wanted to mention knowledge. You can know a ton of facts or a ton of stats and data, statistics that can conclude any rational decision. Is that knowledge puffs you up. It makes you bigger than you actually are. In this next section, I'm going to talk about what I dislike about the book or don't agree with. This surprisingly is the biggest section in this review. This section is also the reason why I gave this book a low grade. There's a ton of quality information in this book, the content, the quotes, but there's many things that I have a low opinion of. First, he has this chapter called Don't Be Passionate, and I strongly disagree with this chapter. Just because Ryan doesn't necessarily have passion in his life, he's married, I'm not sure if his hobbies are, he has a purpose for writing, and he makes this distinction between having a purpose versus passion. But you could really combine those. Passion is breathe life. People have passion, and there's no way around this. For one thing, he mentions Burning Man and how people have a passion to go to Burning Man. And I don't think Ryan Holiday has been to Burning Man. He doesn't seem like the type of person who's been to it. He's from Sacramento, which is maybe a 2.5 drive from Black Rock Desert. I've been to Burning Man a couple times. It's a great event to go to. I can see how Burning Man might be unhealthy if it's a passion. You look for this event once a year. But Ryan Holiday is not speaking from experience. Remember, he's 29 years old. He is being very technical in his writing to support his claims. It's passion versus reason and purpose and realism. Ryan sought to cap unbridled enthusiasm, just like unbridled spirit. This is something that is emotional. It is what makes people human, not just being a logical, boring zombie. He thinks goals are vague, zealots are to be avoided and looked down upon. He uses heaps of strawman attempts to bring down statements. He sets up the conjectures to fail. And this is something you have to notice about Ryan's writing. This chapter may be a marketing ploy. With his background being a copywriter, he is a marketer. His writing is too logical, as if it is a Matrix and not so much a Fight Club. He slights Napoleon's passion, and he tampers down risks. I don't think Ryan Holiday has taken many risks in life. Publishing a book is not much of a risk. If you go outside and take some real physical risks, then you'll understand this. I don't think Ryan has that type of vibe. I'm not calling him wimp, but I am noticing that there's a lot of empty statements in this book. He sets things up as if they are worth the risk or not worth the risk. That type of mathematical equation. And puts things as tragedies like the dumbness of Lord of the Flies, barbarism, not having a wild sense of nature, no primal spirit, just a cow, or maybe even as dull as his goats in his Austin yard. Another big standout from this book is his Muhammad Ali diss. where Muhammad Ali had this unbridled spirit. He is from Kentucky. He quotes Muhammad Ali as, "Hi, I am the greatest and I will be the greatest." No sign of humility. And this book is about humility. So he kind of tears down Muhammad Ali, gives some smart ass comments about him. And this is like a couple weeks after Muhammad Ali dies. So that is a interesting timing of the book. Ryan praises the socialist Angela Merkel, who is the Chancellor of Germany. I mean, Europe is in a lot of trouble right now with the Brexit. They have all these immigrants that are there. They are a socialist country. The bureaucrats have taken complete control of Europe. England is just the first of many other countries to leave the European Union. And Ryan, I think, is more of a leftist. I would consider him more on the liberal side. He is from Austin, Texas, slighting George Bush. Of course, many people don't like George Bush. He puts it in the book as George W. Bush is passionate about going to war in Iraq. And that's more of a real smart-ass comment. That's low-hanging fruit slicing. It's taking a cheap shot. Many people don't like Bush. I didn't want to go to war either. It's an ego hit. I will reread the book just to confirm this, but I don't think he slights many females of having an ego, which I'll talk about later on. He just attacks the male ego. And I do think this is right, where you see the egomaniac mostly being a male, like a tyrant. You see very few female tyrants. They just rule differently. But there are queens in the past that have done just as much damage. There are many points in the book that I did not notice that I thought would have been good to include in the book, like damaged goods or a damaged ego, incentivizing the ego. He had nothing really to say about manipulation and how people with a big ego can be manipulated. He didn't mention the feminism ego, about wanting it all and having promises being fulfilled by males, and also the con of feminism. There wasn't much talked about in terms of competition and how you can outwork personal people around you. Nothing about shame and ego, and did not mention stroking the ego, as in manipulating. Another angle is being stuck on ego and not pressing forward, kind of like having a grit to toughen up and power through it, not being stuck in that particular moment of the ego. I look back at this passionate chapter, and I do think Tucker Max helped him write this chapter. The chapter is real bad, and it must have been a marketing ploy to get the attention of many people. He didn't go through the differences between validation for male and female, ego projection techniques, and how people with a big ego ignore the small talk. Another big point is the Narc Injury. And with the Narc Injury, it's where you somewhat attack someone's character. And this works against people from the dark triad. Someone who's a psychopath, narcissist, or Machiavellian manipulator. I would consider the Tucker Max Narc Injury. He didn't put much remedy in terms of what to do with the ego, such as I believe talk and hype can replace inaction, but at the end of the day, it's all about action. He cites Gawker authors, but who cares about Gawker? They're fucking bankrupt. Ryan Holiday downplays verbalization and visualization techniques. Here's another big point, and I resonate with this, and the comments that he put in the book about this really affected my interest in the book. It's where I really thought this guy was wrong, and I think Ryan Holiday has to be self-aware. I know he's married. He found success early when he was 19, but he hasn't not gone outside. He doesn't have enough experiences where he's been stuck in an echo chamber of wherever he's been. Trying to stay alive and trying to survive, that's normal in the publishing industry. However, there's this book called Into the Wild by John Krakauer, and it's also made into a movie. And he projects youthful naivety and stupidness that someone would step out into the wild. And he did die by eating, I believe, poisonous berries. And this connection with nature is important. He did mention John Muir and meditation as something to do, but there is a threshold of risk that you could take. It might be reckless, it might be life and death. Males in general need to exude courage. Courage to be on your own, courage to explore. And he slights the character Chris McCandless in a low blow type of way. I don't think Ryan Holiday has much of a spirit. I mean, he might be corrupted by the marketing industry with Tucker Max. And even though he did reveal the tactics that they use, which I consider, trust me, I'm lying, to be his best book. And I'm glad he wrote that book. It takes balls to write that book. So no one is actually perfect. This is one of those books where it's got a Jekyll and Hyde review. You don't want to be boring. You want to be prepared. You don't want to be a zombie, yet you want to have passion. And I think he follows the dull stoicism too much philosophy. And when you have this philosophy, like I do repetitively in my other reviews, is you become Voltaire's bastard, where you're ruled by reason, and whatever fucking reason that you hear, you fucking believe it. You don't want to have a Nazi face. A great point I want to mention is he sees selflessness as a virtue, where virtue of selfishness, which you read Ayn Rand, is a virtue. And you don't have to sacrifice yourself with constant humility. You have to press yourself out there. Most people are fucking zombies, or you have a bureaucratic authoritarianism. Just ignore that and do your thing. Taking credit is important when you're surrounded by narcissists. Who cares? We're a part of a team, but you want to press forward with individualism. And in terms of empathy, Molly cares. And I think there will be another sequel to this book, which will make it a 3-part series. Ryan Holiday is obsessed with stoicism, and stoicism is awesome for sports. Everyone that's young and into sports should read Obstacle is a Way. However, I think ego might carry him into this obsession of purpose through stoicism. If you really think about it, Stoics were wimps. If you think too much, you're not really taking much action. As we can see in the title where I mentioned Stephen Pressfield considers Ryan Holiday one of the greatest thinkers, but you're just fucking thinking. You're not thinking with your soul or heart. Not just philosophers who stayed in one city blabbering about truths, or their so-called truths. Also for ego, there is this theory that if you reach 10,000 hours of practice in any particular subject, you are a master and you've achieved that ego, but there really is no magical 10,000 hours. It's just a number. Here's a good quote. One of my favorite quotes from the book is, "Facts are better than dreams," and that's Winston Churchill. And you could toy with that in many different ways, is what are these facts? I do think it's more important to dream big and think big and to take big actions. He does cite many politicians, which I don't consider politicians to be men of virtue, although Churchill is one of the greatest readers to ever been around. There is this constant battle of purpose versus passion, but I think you want the right element of both. A dull knife will always be dull. Sharpen that passion, and passion will sharpen itself. Here's another big takeaway from the book. He does mention social media, but he takes a small section on it. It is a unique time in the world where social media is, where you're unable to repress certain ideas. Right now, social media is being used for ego fluffs and validation, especially with the females. This is going to affect the younger females drastically, whether pretty or they think they're ugly, is that the likes and favoriting is, as well as the subscribers, are tricking the brain into approval and validation. And in terms of ego, a female's peak SMV, which is her sexual market value, is at 21 years old, right around there, where she's at her most beautiful in terms of high fertility rate, hair, curves, and youthfulness and beauty. That they're treated almost like little princesses. And this ego will eventually go away. It goes away slowly from the early 20s of a female. And this ego satiation creates female beauty stars, or it inflates their ego, which is not healthy for them and the people around them. Because what you have is all these thirsty guys chasing these women around through the internet by the click of a button, by liking, following, or I don't want to say stalking, but it's becoming all about attention. It's having a short attention span now. There's Instagram whoring, there's delusional self-importance from having all these subscribers, and it's just subscribers. It could be fake. People are buying subscribers. Also, what I've seen is people use a tactic where if you follow me, I will follow you too. And what probably happens is they follow them, but then they unfollow 2 months down. They're just doing that to everybody, is a follow me tactic. Many young adults' egos are fragile and becoming lateral. There's no depth to your online personality. And that leaks into your personal life, where in the hack Maslow that I've shown before, is that your online persona is becoming part of your self-esteem, which is ridiculous. You see people with anxiety disorders, or many males complaining about anxiety when they've never had a courageous rite of passage. They've never traveled. They put on a fucking VR helmet, and when VR comes through, it's just going to be a lost generation. Unless your ego thinks technology is reality. I contemplate putting a hate button just to have that little bit of freedom of speech enabled truthfulness to it, not just a positive uppity vibe, a fake persona. There is the fake it till you make it, and that is very common on social media. But I somewhat agree with that in terms of effort. Just keep on trying and going for it, and it'll work out for you. But it can create a shallow and very thin shell where people will crumble after their prime. There's not a solid foundation there that they've built. It's all about spotlight and that short attention. Don't let this book counteract big thinking, action, spirit. but also you have to tune out the projection. Understand the setup of arrogance, ignorance, entitlement, too much noise, attention, recognition, and silence. Understand this with realness. In Ryan Holiday's epilogue, he makes it clear that you should confront yourself. Self-awareness is to be examined. You have to look at yourself. There is darkness of the ego, and you have to go through rigorous self-examination, where it may be silence, listening, or meditation. That you have to figure out how ego manifests itself, as well as with the title, Ego is the Enemy, you may be counterintuitive about it and say ego is your ally, where ego might help yourself and other people around you. And if you're doing that, you're doing a real positive thing for yourself and the universe. Humility is important, and maybe some people have too much humility, where they should put themselves out there, where they should take more chances or not listen to psychopaths. And to have a healthy ego, I think you have to go through a rigorous challenge, not so much the obstacle is the way, but go through an actual obstacle course in life to have real legit experiences where you were challenged, not just mentally, but physically. And there's been scars where your ego has been attacked and even slammed to the ground, where all the aspirations and successes and failures of the world smacked you or got squeezed out of a vice to create someone new, a new beginning, a metamorphosis. And ego, I think, is overrated. It's not as important to always waste your time about thinking he has a big ego or your ego is too big or there goes the egomaniac. After your ego has been hammered, all I think you need is the gorilla mindset. And then take action. You don't need the cuck mindset. Go for it. Be all in. Take no prisoners. There's no need to hedge bets. You don't need a publisher to be in hedge. Go guerrilla. Who would this book be especially good for? Especially, this can be sent as a gift to anyone. That's why I think this book has a long lifeline to it, where anyone in your life, a friend, or even your boss, you can give this to them as a joke. They'll look at it and laugh if they see this book being given to them. One individual I think this should go to is Gary Vaynerchuk. In all my reviews of his videos, I've seen so many of his videos on his Ask Gary V show, and I've read all his books, where he is a great guy, especially with his Thank You Economy book. But Gary Vaynerchuk has the biggest ego, and he admits it, but he hustles so much and does so many positive things that for people around him, he is almost easily forgiven. This book will be great for him, where it might be hard for him to look at himself. He claims to have self-awareness, but I consider him to have more ignorance than self-awareness. I don't think he's been through challenges. I don't think he's climbed mountains. He's pseudo in that sense. He's from Jersey. He works in New York City. He's a city kid. He has had a tough life with his family living in a one-bedroom apartment, him hustling, him missing out on opportunities. He had to make sacrifices for his family. But this would be good for him too, because there is that part where Tom Brady is being talked about. He's a super Jets fan. This book would be hard to digest in general for him. Be a man. Don't tuck the cuck. Bad karma is a tuck rule. And I don't think Gary Vaynerchuk does not have that self-awareness. This is a fact. He knows about business and where the markets are going. But is he a good person? Does he do the right thing? Does he love animals? The answer is no. And you have to have awareness of your environment. I don't think he's been out in nature. He doesn't care about animals. So how can you be aware of your own nature when you deny your own nature? His ego will defend that to the cold, hard truth. Other books you can check out are Robert Greene's books, as well as Tucker Max. Both of them are very close to Ryan Holiday. I don't really recommend Tucker Max's book, but just to understand that culture around Ryan and what he's been around, especially toward marketing, in close sense to the marketing of this book. Robert Greene, in terms of his style, Robert Greene was a big influence to him in terms of research. It has a very similar style to the content and opinion and how the quotes are interlaced with history. In closing, it is good to read this book just once. I would not buy it, but many things in the book will be contradicting, and this is his marketing style that he's using. Much different from Obstacle is the Way. Don't be entitled. Get rid of that fixed ego. Let it get hammered in, and totally listen.